Hello, everybody. Welcome to another bonus episode of Blowback Season 4. In this episode, Noah talks to the legendary journalist. He probably needs no introduction to many of our listeners, Seymour Hersh. During the events we cover this season, Cy was writing all kinds of stories about the war in Afghanistan, about the torture of the Bush administration, about the war in Iraq, which you probably remember from Season 1. About Pakistan, about Pakistan's pursuit of nukes, and then, of course, eventually an alternate account of the killing of Osama bin Laden. And he's here to talk with Noah about a bit of all of that. So stay tuned and enjoy the conversation between Noah and Cy Hersh.
So the first question is, when did you first become aware of who Osama bin Laden was?
Oh, I probably like everybody else. I mean, after 9/11. I don't think I knew much about him before, if I knew anything. I actually had been working, I was at the New Yorker then. This is obviously in September of 2001. I had been working on a story pretty hard for months on a story about the American oil business and the corruption that was involved in the collapse of Russia. And so I wasn't, I knew nothing about any of those cosmic issues dealing with Al Qaeda, et cetera, and what was going on in the Middle East.
Once the attacks happened, what did you learn about how American intelligence viewed bin Laden? And what was the explanation that you heard given for how he was able to penetrate the nation's many, many defenses?
You know, my initial approach was not to deal with him. Because that's what sort of everybody was doing. My thought was first I had to go to school, talk to various academics and people I knew in the American community, in the American intelligence community, and also in the State Department and other places, academia, just get a feel for what was going on. You could do that rather easily. There were a lot of experts. And one of the things that shocked me is I did talk to people who had been born and raised in Afghanistan and immigrated here, in some cases a decade earlier, and had great local language skills, obviously, and also a sense of Afghanistan from having lived not only in the capital, Kabul, but elsewhere. And none of them told me that they had volunteered their services to the American government as good citizens, and were turned down. In the beginning, we didn't want to have anything to do with anybody who knew something about Afghanistan, so it seemed to me, as opposed to people in the CIA or in the military intelligence or the State Department. That was also, I didn't do much with it, but it interested me. It showed a narrowness of view, which isn't that surprising. We were in a war state, and anybody, it was like being Asian at the time of World War II, when the war with Japan began, when we shuttled an awful lot of innocent people into various internment camps, authorized by, at some point, by Earl Warren, then the governor of California, later the great Supreme Court justice. Anyway, what I did is I just focused in the beginning, not so much about bin Laden, but about how we collected stuff and what we were doing. I'm talking about the intelligence community. I did know people in it, obviously. I didn't know a lot about intelligence in my previous 300 or 400 years working as a newspaper person. And so my first thought is, what do we know about these guys? And then the obvious question then, rather early, I would guess, was how much did the CIA and FBI and NS, National Security Agency, the NSA, they collect signals, as most of your audience would know or should know. How do they communicate with each other? And because the one thing I'd learned in years of reporting on the community is that they don't communicate with each other. They don't like each other, and they're very jealous and proprietary. And so there we are. So the answer was I focused more on collection than I did on getting a feel for Bin Laden. There was a lot. I don't think I could do anything useful in that area. There was an awful lot of expertise about what was going on in terms of the Islamic world that I did not have, but I had a certain expertise in how the community works.
Yeah, and I'm curious also about when you say you focus on collection. I mean, there have been, we learn more about the nature of the NSA intercepts and the FBI and CIA insights into the specific cell that perpetrated the attacks. Richard Clarke has said that he believes there was a CIA operation either to recruit or get inside of that cell prior to the attacks. Do you have any impression of what you think the CIA or FBI might have been doing or not doing in the weeks before or months before?
You mean just in terms of penetrating?
Yeah.
Trying to penetrate? Well, that's always what you do. You always try and turn people. That's how you get promoted in the CIA. Basically, you try and find people to become assets. I mean, it becomes sort of an internal game because if you focus too much on that, the people in the field will find a way to get around the truth and recruit people who don't exist, et cetera. Like that did happen. That's way above most rational people's pay grades, even those who do intelligence. Clarke was inside, so he had a point of view. My problem was I remember taking a group of people. I'm sure I've written about this in my memoir, but I remember taking a group of guys I knew from the CIA to lunch. The CIA headquarters are off Route 123 in suburban Virginia, right adjacent to the district border. And I remember taking a bunch of guys to lunch up there. There was a Chinese restaurant everybody liked, and I took just 3 or 4 guys I knew, and there was one outsider who had just come in from the field and was going to lunch with buddies and discovered this friggin' reporter was there. He kept on staring at me like I was Darth Vader or worse. Anyway, but at one point, one of the guys, we were talking about 2 months after 9/11. I was still getting a feel. I hadn't written anything yet. I was still getting a feel. And I was learning stuff, but not enough to make a difference, I thought. And one of the guys from the operations division, a very competent, bright, honorable, conservative guy, was going on about something, and at some point he mocked the FBI. I jumped in and I said, why are you pissing on the FBI? You guys should be, I don't get any sense that you guys even worked together after 9/11. And he said to me, Cy, Jesus, don't you get it? The FBI catches bank robbers and we rob banks. I'll never forget that. I mean, there you go. He also added, an NSA, I'm supposed to talk seriously to a dweeb that has a protractor in his shirt pocket. And always, I remember the rest of it, and always looks down at his brown shoes when he's talking to you, like a dweeb. So, the problem is totally endemic and can't be shaked out. They didn't share. And I never wrote a story, but I was pretty sure the NSA had tracked. We know the FBI tracked some and the CIA tracked some. I think the NSA, I always believed, but by the time I finally figured out that maybe it was that issue wasn't that important, that they also had tracked. I know the NSA burned some files the day immediately after 9/11, and my understanding was that they were files about people they were watching that they should have shared. But I don't know that because it's hard to know anything about the NSA. They're very tough to penetrate as a journalist.
You were one of the first reporters to cover the emerging torture program in the early years of the Bush administration. And I was curious about how the story emerged, how it was discussed, was there this new program that was really dicey within the administration, or was it this thing that came out over drinks and, in drips and drabs about some really heinous stuff that people at the agency and others were getting into?
First of all, I would substitute Bush's language that he used once and never again. You talk about the American program. I would substitute the word crusade because, it's a reference to what happened in, from the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, when the various religious groups went after each other in a very heartfelt way, to put it mildly. The rivers around Baghdad were red with blood, as the poets were saying in those days. So it was always seen as a war to the death, a jihad, if you will. But I learned things from, you're asking me a question that I can't give you a totally candid answer to. I learned things from people who were horrified by what they were reading in some of the more secret reports that were being presented. All of this was done not in an ordinary channel of communication. The torture programs had their own special back channel ways of communicating with each other. And don't forget that the so-called black sites weren't set up that early. I don't think they got going until late 2002, 2003. But in the first 6, 4, 5 months, there's a lot of bad stuff went on. Just as simple as that, I would say that a significant percentage, more than half of the initial 300, 400, 500 prisoners, who were bound, gagged, tied up, put into jumpsuits. I don't remember the color. They were pretty vivid. Were they yellow? Something like that. Jumpsuits, and flown, tied up and to the side of an Air Force plane. They were flown in horrible conditions to Guantanamo, which was set up by maybe late 2001, or certainly by 2002, began to take people. They were building as fast as they could. The initial plan, I remember some wonderful general told me that one of the early plans was to set up the prison in the Marshall Islands, somewhere there, but there was apparently too much radioactivity left over from our nuclear testing in the 1940s. Yeah, so they decided not to do that. But the only reason I mention it is, as I said, apparently, they did discuss it, but there was, we did allow, anybody who's watched Oppenheimer wouldn't be surprised to know that after the war ended, we went on a massive campaign of increasing our arsenal and doing a lot of testing in the late 40s and 50s in the islands and the South Pacific. Well, look, even if you saw the movie, the first test was in New Mexico. There's no evidence they warned any of the native, the mostly Indian, but American Indian communities downwind. There's none. I mean, it wasn't dealt with in the movie, but I'm not criticizing the movie for it, because that's a different issue. But there was no thought about the local community, and there was incredible damage done to hundreds of people, long-term damage that I don't know if we ever did acknowledge it or not. The reason I know this kind of stuff, those are the kind of letters I've been getting for, since, along with the Kennedy assassination and stuff like that. I get letters from various people in New Mexico about the continuing, it's now since 1940, the test was Trinity was in 1945. About 2 months before the actual bombing that would have made it in the summer. And so, the amount of, I wouldn't call it criminal, I wouldn't call it atrocious. I would just call it plain stupid stuff we did and do. It's pretty amazing. But that's just because of war. War itself is a pretty heinous operation.
And the Abu Ghraib story is, to my mind, still the biggest of the number of different torture stories, because there are many multiple of them. And the Abu Ghraib revelations were the most significant, I think. And I was curious if you could say how they had maybe some relationship to Guantanamo, how, the crusade was in the air, perhaps, or was it, actually more of a direct policy?
Well, that's always been a highly classified issue. That is the general who did the initial investigation has been left with grave doubts about how this policy evolved. There's a wonderful officer named Tony Tagubo, who was fired by Rumsfeld when I wrote a story, the first story for the New Yorker, that included the internal report that Tagubo did, a quite brilliant one. And it's the strangest thing. I didn't meet Tony Taguba, the Army Major General, quite actually one marvelous person. I don't socialize very much with, for a lot of reasons with people I know, but on the inside. But this is somebody, I had to take to lunch with. I had to take him and his wife to dinner with me and my wife because my wife I want her to meet somebody with that kind of integrity. The only problem was Rumsfeld accused him of leaking it to me, the report I had about Abu Ghraib, a very detailed report he wrote. And I never met Tony Taguba until a year and a half after the event. But that didn't matter to Rumsfeld, Don Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, who was an attractive man. I was a reporter as a kid. One of my first jobs was working for the AP in Chicago. I was a Chicago kid, and I went to the University of Chicago and even went to law school, which I just hated. Got out there, I actually quit. I was basically kicked out. I stopped going to school. But after bumming around a little while, I ended up as a reporter for the Associated Press and covered him when he was running for Congress from a district north of the city in one of the suburbs, ritzy suburbs. And he was a pretty charming, funny guy and very bright. As Secretary of Defense, he was just a horror. And yet he was beloved by the press because he was attractive, nice-looking guy, and was funny. I did a lot of my stories. I used to get enraged at him because, and the more, he liked it. He wasn't bothered by the fact I thought it was just awful what he was doing. But not that I was that friendly with him, but I'd known him. I'd known him for a long time. And the New Yorker, this New Yorker comes out on a Sunday and it's printed on a Saturday and it's distributed Sunday night. And when I was doing a lot of hot stuff for them, we always, the editors decided to give the Sunday morning TV shows. There was a time when people paid attention to the Sunday morning news shows. There, Face the Nation and the various 3 networks all had shows, and CNN. It's a whole different now. It's all been sort of diluted. And anyway, we'd give them a heads up on the story on Saturday night. So Sunday morning they would put out the stories. On Monday he would begin a news conference. He'd say, "Oh my, I see that Hersh is up to it again." And the next line, I got the transcripts. They were public. You could ask for them and get it. There was no secret about it. And the next line would be laughter from the press corps. And then he'd make another snotty comment, and there'd be more laughter, and then he'd go on with what he wanted to say. So it was quite a brilliant way of just dealing with this pretty serious story that I'd written before. So I'm not a huge fan of the American Press Corps. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you're not going to get an endorsement from me about them. I am curious also, you wrote a story for The New Yorker a few years after this, in the late 2000s, that has actually always stuck with me as interesting and provocative, but a really rigorous framing of American policy, which is that America has been putting the thumb on the scale of Sunni Islam versus Shia, and, on behalf of Sunni Islam, and how that evolved out of our Cold War strategy and thinking in the region.
And it had the name, what was the name of that piece? Can't remember, but it had a 2-sentence, two-word lead. Whatever it is. It was about the American decision that we're going to put the Sunni versus the Shia. We're going to go to war. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That story was published in 2007. For some reason, I can't remember the title, but it was the single most reprinted story I've ever done in my life. All over the Arab world. It was just, what was the name of it? Damn it, I don't remember.
Hold on. I'll look this up and then we can edit it to make it sound really smart.
No, I don't. No. There's nothing wrong. No, don't do that. We don't ever want to fake stuff.
Oh.
Don't bother. It was called The Revision or something like that.
The Redirection.
The Redirection. And it's so funny because I write a lot now, a column, almost try to do it once a week for Substack, and I'm going on vacation. And, I'm going to actually, play a little more tennis than I usually do and all that crap. Not that I'm reluctant, not that I'm not eager always to play, but that isn't the point. I'll play more. But, and I was thinking of all the stories I would maybe reprint one week. and to say, I'm not doing it this week, I'm on vacation, forget it, but here's something you ought to read. That story is the first one that occurred to me, because it just described a policy of creating an enduring war between Sunni and Shia. You know that in Iraq, which somehow, it's only in America. Bin Laden, who's a absolutely fanatic Islamic militant, Shia militant, and pretty much a whore. Even though he helped us beat the Russians, and we use him to help beat the Russians in Afghanistan, of course, which then put him in a position to have more power and work closely with the Taliban, et cetera. We responded to him over the next 2 years by overthrowing Saddam Hussein, who hated radical Islam as much as anybody in the world, and Bashar Assad. We all went after him, called him, and did all sorts of problems with him. Also couldn't stand. I mean, he was actually elected. Bashar Assad was neither. He was in a minority sect, and certainly not a Muslim, but the moderate Muslims always voted overwhelmingly for him, not maybe 55-60% for him, even though he wasn't one of them. And in Iraq, before we went after Saddam Hussein, the notion of a Sunni-Shia split that now has divided the country unbelievably didn't exist. In fact, there were more Shia officers in the Iraqi army than there were of Sunni. There wasn't a division. But when we took over Iraq, and with our stupidity and civilian control, and disbanded the army, first thing we did was disband the military, which was full of competent soldiers who had no place else to go to make a living. And we also cut back their pensions, so that we got rid of the pensions. We made them very, one group got $25, a little higher got $50, and the top generals got $100 a month, which wasn't sustainable if you had a family and children. Anyway, even after our intervention, and for the first time, we organized an election. A new parliament would exist under the American rule that would be divided by the percentage of certain sects there were. In other words, there would be 42% Sunni and 33% Shia, and then various other sects would get another percentage, making it 100%. So for the first time, the Iraqi people were exposed to that kind of direct sort of racism, if you will, or quantification, what you will. It hadn't happened before. I mean, you can't imagine doing it worse. The first thing you do is you disband the army, which and give them a pathetic pension, which leads them to say, well, the only people that want me are the opposition. So let me go find them and join up, which is what happened. Why the opposition got so good very quickly. They had an awful lot of Iraqi military that were involved. I actually know this because I spent time, not so much in Iraq, in Syria. I spent time in southern Syria, right on the border. There was a couple hotels there, and I was plucking 2-star generals and 3-star generals from the Iraqi Air Force, even and the Army, who were running out of the country. There was a cab. It was about a $700 cab ride from Baghdad to the border, and they were taking it. And in some cases, I even, when I was working for the New Yorker, I remember in the winter, it's sort of fun to do things differently instead of sticking in Washington and horsing around with what I can find. When Iraq began to fall apart, I did learn that a lot of the generals didn't want to join the opposition, but they knew a lot about the Iraqi military, where if there were bombs, nuclear bombs, where they were, if there was chemical weapons, where they were, and they were fleeing or would flee to Syria or any place they could to get out. And there was one guy who had a daughter in med school in Iraq that wanted to get out, and so I somehow got in contact with him, and I remember paying $700 of New Yorker money to get a car to go to Baghdad, across the border, and pick his family up and drive him over the border into Syria, where there was an arrangement made for some living conditions. I don't know if she was going to med school that was in Arabic, and she could handle that. I remember spending 4 days with that general locked up in a hotel during the day. Yeah, he goes home at night. I let him go, but I locked up and debriefing him, if you will, about everything he knew. And it was he in December of 2003, who told me the first time about Abu Ghraib, just to show you how things work. And the reason he told me about it, he was saying there's one prison you really ought to look to. And I said, why? He said, well, because the woman, we arrest women too. And Abu Ghraib had a women's section. They also had a children's section because some of the women we arrested had children. He said that the mothers and sisters of officers I knew were writing home and saying, please come and have me killed in prison because I've been disabused, ashamed, or violated by prison guards. And so the first time, that was in December of 2003, it took me 4 months to get going on a story. I was working on it, trying to find ways into it. But I knew this place called Abu Ghraib must have been some holy hell, where the daughters and wives of officers who were still not arrested, but they were. The idea was you arrest a woman because then you can get the man. And the whole idea of what we were doing is we were arresting we couldn't find the enemy. So the idea was arrest young people or people of some preeminence, and maybe even their family. The idea of getting them to either tell us what they knew about the opposition to the Americans and as we began our invasion of Iraq, and also the idea was to arrest young guys that were doing nothing but putting them in this horrible prison. And if you remember the Abu Ghraib pictures, and I'm sure many in the audience some may be too young to, but look up Abu Ghraib, you'll see they were naked men, and the prison guards, the American prison guards, would make them walk around naked and pile them up, and the woman would pretend to masturbate him. All of this in the Arab world, the Arab world was terribly sensitive to nudity. I spent years. I'm not an expert on the Middle East. I don't know the language at all. But I would go to Cairo to see people, and I go talk about playing sports. I go play tennis with somebody in the showers in America when I was a kid, playing sports in college and stuff like that. We were all in the showers together, slapping each other in the butt, that kind of stuff. In the Middle East, there's no such thing, even in the men's quarters, of a community shower. Every shower is private. It's just in the Quran, a lot of places in the Quran, that nudity. And when those pictures came out about it came out in the New Yorker about the naked prisoners being piled up in columns and made to stand and all naked, and dogs barking at them, and oh my God. And the guys are trying to protect their genitals. It's just horrible stuff. I'm not sure all the pictures we had that I collected a lot of them were all shown. There was some censorship going. But I remember I have an old friend in Israel, tough guy that was in the Mossad. I mean, really tough guy. Son of a bitch. Gave me a lot of trouble. But he called me after that. And when he saw those pictures in the magazine, in the New Yorker, they do read the New Yorker around the world, I will tell you that. And called me and he said, as usual, like, Hersh, let me tell you something about myself. You know what I did. You know the things I've done. There's no alley in Damascus I didn't know by 1960 looking for Nazis. He said, and I have scars. You've seen the big scar I have from a fight, but let me tell you something, he said. I don't like the Arabs, and they don't like me, the radical Arabs, and they don't like me, or make it Arabs, and they don't like me. But I'm telling you something. This was back 2 decades ago. This kind of thoughts. The next sentence doesn't exist anymore in Israel. But I know, much as I can't stand them, we're going to have to share this country with them. And let me tell you, Hersh, what you did with those pictures, by publishing those pictures of naked men and being abused like that by the American prison guards, he says, you've made that reconciliation impossible. They will never forgive you for what you did. Scare the hell out of me. But, that was then, and this is now. We've gone way beyond that in the Middle East. And it's now it's not us anymore. It's the Israelis running the country that are doing it. So it goes. Anyway, this is going on are we in the second hour already? Where are we?
No, we're just over 30, but I have the last question I wanted to ask about.
See, if I hadn't said anything, you'd have kept me talking, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Last one. You essentially reported in the London Review of Books that Osama bin Laden, or rather that everything we knew about the raid that killed Osama bin Laden as presented by the White House was fiction. And the cover story...
Let me have a caveat. Right
Yes,
there.
please.
Everything except the fact we did kill him. The SEALs killed him, and Obama was involved in that decision. Everything after that is just a pre-election. He was up for re-election, an African-American running for re-election. I mean, he was going to do anything he could and milk this for all he could. I mean, which is what a president will do, I guess. Even Obama. Keep on going. Ask your question. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So what you describe, he's killed, and there's this massive PR campaign to cover it up and so forth. But I specifically wanted to ask about what more was Pakistan and their role in the whole affair. And specifically, why were our supposed allies, the Pakistanis, essentially holding on to bin Laden in Abbottabad and staying quiet about it rather than handing over literally the most wanted guy in the world?
Well, because Pakistan has always been, my country first. And, our concerns are less important to them. That's one obvious thing that always happens. We always seem to, we think we can buy the kind of loyalty you can't. The loyalty to your country comes first. And he was in a prison. He was a captive of the Pakistanis. He wasn't there just living as a free guy. He was living in a compound that was about 40 kilometers, maybe 30 miles in the foothills above the capital, Islamabad, of Pakistan. And let me assure you, in the summer, it gets to be about 105, 110 in Islamabad. But if you go up to the foothills, a 45-minute ride away, it's 90 and you feel a lot better. So I always would call Abbottabad. It was all full of fancy homes with estates. Like he had a compound. There was a wall around it, and he was locked up there. I always considered Abbottabad was sort of like the analogy would be a sort of the Martha's Vineyard of Islamabad, and Islamabad is the head of the capital city. So you had a lot of politicians, members of parliament, a lot of military headquarters there in Rawalpindi, which is a sister city to Islamabad. It was the main military headquarters for the Pakistani army. And what makes it even more weird for the press buying that story that he was just living there, not as a prisoner. It was about the compound happened to be within a mile and maybe 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles of the west point of the Pakistani Army's west point of their training school, and 2 kilometers from a major brigade division, a very competent military division, the brigade headquarters. I mean, he was surrounded by military. The idea that he wasn't a prisoner, and this is one of the issues I had to fight because there was so much propaganda coming for the administration about it. He definitely was why Pakistan? Because Pakistan's always interested in their own interests, and also the truth is that the deal we made. There was the one deal we made with the Pakistanis, and the American government has never been straight. We obviously knew the Pakistanis ran it. They've never told that story. It was just a question of the Pakistanis learning about it we learned about it from somebody. We offered $25 million for his information, and somebody in the Pakistani army who had access to knowledge of bin Laden, an intelligence officer who didn't make general, cashed in the $25 million and was moved to London. So what Pakistan has had a long relationship with Saudi Arabia. The Pakistan ex-military and ex-intelligence guys have traditionally run the Saudi security services, which in Saudi Arabia are pretty expensive, given all the oil they have and all the beating up they do of the Shia population. They still hang them from upside down, the radicals, and let them bleed out in the squares. Anyway, I mean, it's tough stuff. Nothing wonderful about Saudi Arabia or its leader. What happened is the best guess I have, and I've been told this, but it's just hard to check it out. There was money passed, to keep it quiet. The Saudis paid an awful lot of money. One thought I had, one thing I was told, but it's very easy they changed the law now, but back then in 2002 or 3 or 4, when this was all cooking, And I didn't, in the beginning, and this was all, 211 was when we hit him. He'd been a prisoner there maybe for 4 or 5 years. And in those days, you could reflag a oil tanker. So you could fill an oil tanker with Saudi oil. It's high. It's wonderful oil. It's very very light, and it's easily distilled. It doesn't have a lot of various chemicals that are
right. It's not smelly or something.
Well, it's very light. It's just light. It doesn't. It's clear, and it's you can light a match and get gasoline and get the other kind of products you want out of oil from it. It's easily handled. Anyway, and you reflag a tanker, and you're talking about maybe $30-40 million worth of oil. And so that was the way they got money to the Pak generals in payment for keeping it quiet. But I don't think there's any question that the Pakistani generals, a lot of them, and some of the officials maybe, understood what was going on and agreed that we're not going to tell the Americans. Why should we? We're going to make a lot of money off this, and to hell with them. There was always an ambivalent feeling about us in Pakistan, even though we were close aid. Don't forget, what was the name of that famous guy that was shot? The U-2 pilot that was shot down.
Gary Powers.
Well, he flew out of Pakistan, and India was pro-Russia those days. Pakistan was pro the West, so there was a tremendous reason to keep Pakistan and look the other way. And the government, the United States has not told that story, honestly, about how we learned about Pakistan. I doubt if they will.
Yeah.
But I learned about going to Pakistan. And I'll defend what I wrote was my, last breath. Maybe it'll be on the tennis court. That'd be great.
Yeah, well, hopefully not anytime soon, man.
No, well, you're so kind. How nice of you to say that. I got through this conversation tonight. That's fine. Anyway, Noah.